Hi, I'm Nafisa Latic, and this is Across the Balkans. This week, we look into renewed tensions between Serbia and Kosovo ahead of a meeting in Brussels between Kosovo Prime Minister Albin Kurti and Serbian President Aleksandar Vucic. The EU says it's difficult to predict if the meeting on August 18 will help restart dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina. Relations between the two countries reached a breaking point last week when ethnic Serbs blocked access to two border crossings in the north of Kosovo. The plan came after plans by the Kosovo government to require people entering Kosovo with Serbian IDs to replace them with local ones. Kosovo postponed the plan following the protests, but the tensions have exposed long-standing fault lines between the two neighbors. Serbia and its main ally Russia do not recognize Kosovo's independence, and Belgrade has relied on Moscow's support in blocking initiatives involving Kosovo at the UN Security Council.
A bridge over the river Ibar divides the Kosovar city of Mitrovica from Albanians in the south and Serbs in the north. Right now, it bears no traces of what happened just a week ago when ethnic Serbs in the north barricaded the Jarnije and Bernac border crossings nearby. Tensions had flared after a decision by Kosovo's government to have ethnic Serbs swap their Serbian-issued license plates for Kosovar-issued ones came into force. Kosovo's Prime Minister, Albin Kurti, then postponed implementing the new rules for a month upon the request of the U.S. Ambassador to Pristina, Jeffrey Hovenair. But despite the calm, Kosovo's Interior Minister, Jalal Svelca, says tensions are still running high in the north. He claimed masked men wearing uniforms and carrying weapons have attacked Kosovo's citizens.
Do të kërkohet një kohë që situata të qetësohet përkundër që situata është stabile. Do të thotë institucionet e Kosovës në plotëni janë duke zbatuar rënd e ligj atje. Pikat kufitare, infrastruktura kritike, rrugët ka qarkullim të lirë të njerëzve. Do të thotë çdo gjë po I kthehet normalitetit. Ngadal, edhe pse situata është e tensionuar.
The minister also says it's not ethnic Serbs in Mitrovica's north who are barricading the roads.
Nuk ka rezistencë të qytetarëve të banorëve atje. Janë struktura kriminale të përkrahura drejt për drejt nga Serbia, mos themi edhe me bashkëpjesëmarrje nga pjesë caktuara të institucioneve të sigurisë të Serbisë, të involvuara në këtë rezistencën që po I bëjnë shtrirjes së rendit dhe ligjit atje.
Soon after the roads were blocked, the NATO-led Kosovo force said it was prepared to intervene if the stability and security of northern Kosovo was being put at risk. Mitrovica's South Mayor, Bedri Hamza, is also concerned about what's happening on the other side of the bridge. But he says it's nothing new.
Unë kuptoj që në pjesë tjera të Kosovës dhe përtej Kosovës nuk përjetohet njëjtë situata. Sigurisht se është krejt normal që nuk I dinë edhe detalet të ndjeshmërinë e situatës. Mi po ne si qytetarët Mitrovicës ne dim që nga pas lufta, domethënë që tu ka pas një qetësi absolute, ka pas situata ku kanë qenë mjaft tensionuese, mjaft problematike dhe e dim që letë është mundes shkendia e problemet.
Meanwhile, Serbian NGOs have called for a peaceful solution to the crisis in the north. Security analyst Agim Muslu sees the tensions in the north of Kosovo as an extension of Russia's hybrid war strategy, where Moscow uses its influence to indirectly intervene in the region. In the past few years, Russia has been investing heavily in Serbian media companies, which analysts blame for spreading hate speech and misinformation regarding the Kosovo issue. Kosovo's Prime Minister recently said that a Russian humanitarian center in the Serbian town of Niš, about 100 kilometers from Pristina, is where Moscow coordinates its hybrid war to damage Kosovo both inside and out. And regardless of the situation, he believes Kosovo's decision on the license plates will come into force on the 1st of September, simply because it's not opposed by the country's ethnic Serbs, and that the problem is rather stroked from across the border.
Nëse kërkesat serbe, apo të qeverisë serbe, apo të popullit serb në atë pjesë, për mos ndrimin e tabelave dhe mos paraqitjen e letërnjoftimeve tjera. Nëse janë legjitime, po pse I duan Vucicit njerëz e maskuar dhe të armatosur në atë pjesë? Për çfarë?
It was only in June this year that Kosovo began to force Serbian vehicles entering the country to swap their license plates. Pristina says Serbia has been doing the same with Kosovo's vehicles for almost a decade, based on a free movement deal the two countries signed in Brussels, and assures that ethnic Serbs north of the river have no issue with the law. Tensions between the two neighbors erupted in the 1998-1999 war, when Kosovo was a Serbian province. The war ended after NATO's military intervention forced Serbia to withdraw its forces. The United Nations ran the territory for 9 years before Kosovo in 2008 declared independence, a move that Serbia still doesn't recognize to this day. But with NATO and Russia now becoming involved in this latest crisis, reinforcing the law come September may prove to be a bridge too far.
My guest today is Angeluše Morina from Đakova, Kosovo. She's a senior policy fellow at European Council on Foreign Relations. Great to have you with us on Across the Balkans. I want to start with asking you, how do you see the latest escalation of tensions at the Kosovo-Serbia border? Was it really that serious as it was reported in international media on that night and the following day?
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. Yes, you're right. The situation that took place, I think now more than a week ago, it was really not that serious in reality comparing to last year. So last year in September, there was a flare exactly for the same reason in the north of Kosovo, and it lasted for, if not more than a month, but around that time. And the parties were brought together to Brussels. A lot of shuttle diplomacy took place from Westerners, Western diplomats were involved. The Quint embassies were quite busy, so on and so forth. So this time, I'm sure the magnitude of seriousity was the same, but I think what made it worse was social media and all the incitement that took place in the social media and all the rhetoric that alluded to war in the north of Kosovo made it even worse. I don't think that quite, it's what the reality was actually
Why do you think?
terrain. So,
why do you think this was the reaction
Yes.
across the world, especially among
Exactly.
Ukrainian observers, I must say?
No, this is a very good question. I think it's the right point that you're making. I think this time the public opinion is kind of geared in that way to immediately start, I wouldn't say start panicking, but immediately start kind of thinking along those lines. There is the Russian influence in the Balkans, which there is, of course, and I'm sure there is a lot of influence in this case as well. And there is the war going on. There is the public perception in Europe and also in kind of the transatlantic community, this war, Russia versus the rest of Europe, and all the war about the energy and so on and so forth. And of course, Kosovo is usually taken as one of the examples by the Russian president and by others as well, that it could potentially be another flare-up in the Balkans where there's a lot of Russia influence. And while the case of Kosovo is being taken an example, it's a totally different story, of course. And the level of security is not the same. I can't predict what will happen in a month or so, but I think everyone ought to be a little bit careful when talking about drawing parallels and talking about another war in the Balkans and so on and so forth.
So now all is set for that meeting between Vucic and Kurti in Brussels. I do want to read one quote from the European Commission representative. He said it is already a very important step that the both are coming to Brussels to discuss how to move forward and how to prevent situations that we have seen in the past. How far away are we from these talks being restarted, and what do you think will happen in Brussels?
So I like to say that the talks have been going on since 2011, which also, gives one an idea that there has been many failures on different parts why we have this situation we have today in 2022. To go back to the meeting has been, or there were background efforts to bring this meeting together for months now, but it could not be realized. And so eventually now there is a date, and we hear from officials in Brussels, but also from Kosovo and Serbia, that the 18th of August is the date when all parties agreed to meet. The agenda is not very clear, and I don't think it's public at all. So we don't know what the agenda contains for the 18th of August. But I can only imagine it has to do with the continuation or the efforts of the EU to continue trying to come to some sort of a final agreement between Kosovo and Serbia. Now, judging from previous meetings of these two leaders, they didn't go very well. These meetings are usually accompanied with a lot of insults among one another.
But why? Why? It seems like none of the other wants to take any concessions. This is how it looks from the outside. Albin Kurti, since he came to power, he didn't quite make any concessions to Serbia and vice versa.
So you're right, I agree. I don't think there is readiness among the parties to come some sort of a conclusion, some sort of a final agreement. And they seem to be sitting in the opposing ends. If you listen to the rhetoric coming out of, or the reasoning coming out of the Kosovo institutions, they are not prepared to go ahead with some previous agreements because they find them unconstitutional or not in par with the constitution of Kosovo. In Serbia, you hear that no one is really ready to tackle the Kosovo issue or the dispute with Kosovo heads on, not even in the opposition. You don't find anyone who's prepared to really deal with Kosovo and move on as a country. So there are many factors, and I would say also many actors, why the two parties are sitting in the opposing ends. But I also like to add that there is also a lot of failure in the part of the transatlantic leadership or transatlantic community that has been leading these efforts, especially European Union. And because of many faults that one finds in the making of the foreign policy making in the European Union, we have kind of a stumbling block when it comes to Kosovo and when it comes to this dispute with Serbia. I have to say that there has been maybe not enough efforts to how to integrate the Serbian community within the institutions and the rules and the regulations of Kosovo. Of course, you cannot blame Kosovars and Kosovo institutions for this failure. There is also the element of Serbia that is very much present in the north of Kosovo. President of Serbia is very much present in the north of Kosovo in different forms. For example, Lista Srpska, the only political party that represents the Serbs in Kosovo, they openly say that they take orders from Belgrade. They listen to Belgrade. I mean, this is not a secret. They openly, blatantly say this. So there is a lot of Serbian influence coming from Belgrade in the north of Kosovo. So the community, the Serbian community, is really not allowed, doesn't have the space to be democratically minded. Let's put it like that.
Yes, okay. So a lot of things to discuss for both leaders in Brussels. I hope the latest escalation will bring them closer to dialogue on the 18th. And Jalusha Morina, thanks so much for being my guest here on Across the Balkans. It's time to look at some other stories making headlines in the region. Montenegrin Prime Minister Dritan Abazovic has signed a controversial agreement with the Serbian Orthodox Church. The deal regulates relations between the church, including its real estate ownership rights and the state of Montenegro. The deal has sparked protests and has been criticized by pro-Western political parties who say it gives the church too much power compared to the other religious communities. The opposition has called for an urgent parliamentary vote of no confidence, dragging Montenegro into another political crisis. Montenegro declared its independence from Serbia in 2006, but its church did not gain autonomy and remained under the Serbian Orthodox Church.
The Montenegrin government is determined to provide all religious communities identical rights, and we are happy and satisfied if with today's move we have contributed to that.
Do not equate the Serbian Orthodox Church to other religious groups. This religious group, however, is a political organization. Other religious groups are not. This one contests the existence of Montenegro's largest ethnic group, the largest group of citizens in a civilized, tolerant Montenegro, where all religious communities are. Do you have any idea what would happen if someone would do this in a Western country, deny its citizens? He would not be a metropolitan in that country for 3 hours.
And at least 12 people have been killed after a bus carrying Polish pilgrims veered off a highway in northern Croatia. All 32 surviving passengers were injured and some of them remain in serious condition. Poland's justice minister has ordered an investigation into the cause of the crash. Bulgarians are heading into another snap election, the fourth in 2 years. And each one of them has dragged the country into a political crisis. So, what's happening in Sofia this time? In late July, the Bulgarian Socialist Party announced it had failed to form a government following the resignation of Prime Minister Kiril Petkov. The parliament has since been dissolved, with elections scheduled for the 2nd of October. Earlier in June, Petkov and his We Continue to Change party was toppled by a no-confidence vote. He was elected on his promises to end corruption and introduce reforms in the EU's poorest member state. Meanwhile, polls show the nationalist and pro-Russian The Revival Party has grown in popularity following Moscow's attack on Ukraine. Let's take a closer look at why Petkov's pro-EU government collapsed after just 6 months and how the conflict in Ukraine has changed Bulgaria's political landscape.
Това, което те не разбраха, че така не могат да спечелят българския народ. Обещаваме, че ние ще продължим в тази битка да отвоюваме държавата си и един ден ще имаме България без задкулисие.
A no-confidence motion has proven successful for the first time in Bulgaria's young democratic history. It all began with the ruling coalition losing its majority after one of the 4 parties, the ITN, withdrew, citing disagreements over the budget and Bulgaria lifting its veto on North Macedonia's EU accession talks. Then, the opposition tabled a no-confidence vote. And now, Prime Minister Kiril Petkov's government has collapsed after just 6 months. People poured onto the streets of the capital Sofia in support of Petkov.
Искам да живея в демократична правова държава. Независимо кое е правителството, но ми се струва, че до тук това правителство има най-голям шанс.
But opposing voices were also raised. This was how supporters of Kostadinov's pro-Russian Revival Party supported the no-confidence motion. Breaking from the traditionally friendly tone towards Moscow, the Harvard-educated Petkov pursued a more pro-European and pro-NATO path. Petkov condemned Russia's military aggression in Ukraine, and in April he visited Kyiv and met with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. He also promised to help Ukraine, much to the anger of his coalition partner. The pro-Russian Bulgarian Socialist Party threatened to leave the coalition if there was military help. And then Gazprom cut off gas supplies to Bulgaria after Sofia refused to pay in rubles, a serious challenge for a country that is 90% dependent on Russian gas. But even the no-confidence vote has done little to quell the tension between Sofia and Moscow. Last month, 70 Russian diplomats were expelled for working against Bulgaria's interests. Then, Russia's ambassador to Bulgaria, Eleonora Mitrofanova, said she would ask for the closure of Sofia's diplomatic representation in Moscow. Russia recently expelled 14 Bulgarian diplomats. Back in Sofia, President Rumen Radev handed 3 mandates to form a government, but all of them failed. The president has now appointed a caretaker government and called for snap elections in October. With 4 elections in just 2 years and relentless political confrontations, the public has grown tired and impatient. But as fuel and consumer goods prices spike and an unsolved energy crisis looms on the horizon, Bulgaria looks set for an early winter.
Let's cross now to Sofia. I'm joined there by Rumena Filipova. She's a chairperson at the Institute for Global Analytics. Rumena, lovely to have you with us. I have to start by asking, why are we seeing a rise of pro-Russian parties in Bulgaria and this latest political crisis?
Well, first of all, we have to say that Bulgaria has traditionally been defined by its ambivalence between East and West. So it's a continuous trend in domestic politics, but also in foreign policy. This inability to actually forge a consistent and determined pro-Western position. Now, the previous government, Petkov's government, actually showed the political will and determination to make a change in this regard, and the government, but also we continue the change more specifically, showed that determination to counter Russian influence, specifically in the sphere of energy, by refusing to continue talks with Gazprom after the latter decided to cut off gas supplies to Bulgaria. Also, there were important steps taken towards combating disinformation more generally, but also Russian disinformation in Bulgaria specifically, and these initiatives took place on the political level. Now, of course, to your question, these steps created a lot of dissatisfaction among traditionally pro-Western actors in Bulgaria, and some of them being conduits of Russian influence in the country, who mounted significant pressure on the government and are hoping for a reversal of the more pro-Western foreign policy line that was taken.
Can he again win the elections in October? Can he create another coalition?
So currently, it may be somewhat hard to predict what's going to happen in the near future, because there may be conflicting social trends. On the one hand, we may expect to see once again the apathy and also distrust of the political process in Bulgaria, which may lead to a lower turnout once again. But on the other hand, it's important to say that we may actually see heightened mobilization on the part of the critically minded, active sections of society, which may well be a continuation of the trend towards protests, which started in 2020 and which call for change.
And how detrimental for Petkov's government was the dispute surrounding the deal with North Macedonia?
Now, I would say that the government took a very progressive line on this issue, wanting to solve historical issues and think about our joint future with North Macedonia in the region and also within the EU. But I would actually argue that the North Macedonian issue was used as a pretext on the part of certain political actors, on the part of ITN in particular, to withdraw from the coalition government. And I would say that it was domestic political interests rather than differences related to foreign policy that led to the implosion of the government, rather than the policy line on North Macedonia itself.
And Rumena, how do Bulgarians feel about this fourth vote in 2 years, having in mind the current economic crisis, lots of issues taking place in Bulgaria, natural gas also, as it gets a vast majority of it from Russia? How do they feel of going again to vote, and can the country even afford this?
Well, a lot of sociological polls have actually shown that the Bulgarians didn't want to have another vote, and more or less they were in favor of the continuation of the work of the current government. And there was this degree of exhaustion descending from 2021 and the 3 rounds of elections that we had. So I would say that these were disagreements within the political class that led to the implosion of the government, rather than there being a social movement or protests that demanded a new set of elections. Now, I would, however, have to place all of this political instability and the inability to form a continuous government against the larger trends and developments in Bulgarian society and politics, and the major social and political opposition of our current times is the opposition competition between the so-called forces of the status quo and the forces of change. So I would argue that this is a much more long-term process that may not even be resolved in the elections in October.
Let's see what happens. Rumena Filipova, thank you so much for being our guest. We'll continue to follow Bulgaria's upcoming elections and speak to voters to see what they're expecting this time. Thanks for watching this episode of Across the Balkans. See you next time. Bye-bye for now.